Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show. Now, August is Women's Month in South Africa, marking the more than 20,000 women who marched to the Union buildings on the 9th of August in 1956. This in protest against the extension of past laws being extended to women. In today's program, we look at some of the struggles that women are facing at this time, especially in the media. A recent report by PwC shows that South African men are still enjoying higher salaries compared to their female counterparts. I wonder, is this something that you're seeing too? We'll also zoom into gender representation in the media profession. We ask, are there enough women rising through the ranks to hold senior executive positions? How are females being portrayed on our television screens? And what are your thoughts on all of these issues that are coming up? Please share them with us on Twitter and please use the hashtag SABC Media Monitor. Hashtag SABC Media Monitor. Really look forward to hearing from you. We continue with our new feature where we take you back in time and find out where and when a little bit later on in the program. But first, let's take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday papers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times. Okay, so this is what's on the front page of the Sunday Times. It's a story about the public protector, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, saying that she is striking a defiant note, arguing that it's wrong for her to have been handed a costs order by the Constitutional Court for mere legal errors. She says that she should have the status of judges who are not liable for the errors that they make. The City Press has the power utility Eskom as its front page story. Apparently managers are demanding a pay hike, and if there are no salary increases, there could be a strike and load shedding, and that might be possible later in the year. All right, so the Sunday Independent, which we'll show you a bit later on, is leading with a story about King Goodwill Zwelithini, who's apparently furious at plans to back his control of the Ingonyama Trust. The paper is saying that he vented his anger about recommendations that the trust be scrapped and its powers reviewed to give rural people of KwaZulu-Natal more power over the land that they're occupying. Meanwhile, the Sunday Tribune is reporting that a radical rights group hosted a blacks-only event at a secret location in Johannesburg yesterday to acquire the necessary military skills so that black power could be advanced. It's alleged that the Black-Centric Forum posted invitations on social media to its camp. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is reporting that Hout Bay crime fighters have hired top lawyer William Booth to address the shortcomings of the justice system that releases repeat offenders to, as they put it, terrorize the valley over and over again. All right, so that's your newspapers, that's the world of print, but most of you are on social media and you're waking up and this is what's trending, was trending a short while ago. I can tell you that in number 2 right now is Cyril Ramaphosa leaks. So, Tsonga, that's the top trend today. And it seems that a Tsonga man cheated on his partner, and all sorts of things have now started to come up about Tsonga men in general, including their including their, how can I put this? Their abilities. I think that's the only way I can put that. All right, so that's the top trend. And then the other trends, of course, CR17. These are apparently the emails that purport to suggest that President Ramaphosa knew about the fundraising efforts that were taking place in his name. And the Sacred Space always is that program on Radio Metro with Tamin Gubeni, where she does a spiritual show and people really send their thoughts, and their Sunday thoughts is the usual story, of course, people sharing their Sunday motivational messages. So, Tsonga men, is it true what they say about them? I'll leave that up to you. All right. Now, there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us to make sense of all of these stories are my guests, editors today. Let's say good morning to Kubi Rama, who's a gender, media, communications, monitoring, evaluation expert and project manager at Gender Links. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning.
That's a lot, eh?
That's too much for
And we also say welcome to the newly appointed Voice of Wits FM station manager, Shwe Shwe Ku. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you again.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So let's get straight into it. And our first story, a recent report released by PwC called Executive Directors Practices and Remuneration Trends Report for South Africa shows a continued gender pay gap in South Africa, a gap that looks like being a mammoth task for women to overcome. Now, the report shows that women in the media are paid roughly 25.1% less than their male counterparts. Now, this includes news reporters, editors, and photographers. Ladies, that's terrible. 2019, 25.1% less. Is this something that you've seen yourselves, or because of this secrecy in people's pay, one just doesn't know? Let me start with you, Ruby.
Yeah, it's hard. You're right, it's 2019, and I sit here thinking I had this discussion 10 years ago, I had it 15 years ago, I'm done discussing.
Yeah.
Something has to change. And I think those employers need to come clean. There needs to be a level of transparency. And, you know, it's a simple question of fairness.
Yeah.
You're paying people for the same job, you're paying them different salaries. You know, if I were those women, I'd take my employer to the CCMA. Because what is the justification for paying men more than women?
And I suppose the challenge in many ways is finding out. How do you find out if someone is getting paid more than you?
Yeah, because isn't it always the case that, shh, don't tell anyone about
Yeah.
your salary. So, and even when there are increases as people who are working, it's very difficult for us among ourselves to know that we're getting paid
Because you won't
less
share
than
it with
our
each other either.
You know, we're not sharing, no one shares their salaries. And I think for me, what's also important is that we must also recognize that while we have been having this conversation for a while about gender parities in pay, there has been some developments in the representation of women in decision-making positions. And now we need to, and we can't stop having this conversation. We're now saying that, great, now we have gender representation, but can women be in decision-making positions? And then we're also saying, can we get equal pay? So it's not a fight of it's multifaceted, the issues that we need to deal with.
Kubi, you kind of know about these issues. You look at them all the time.
And also, we should not have to ask.
Yeah.
I should not
Should
have
be
to sit here and justify my existence and my abilities. Why? Do men have to do that? No. I mean, it's exactly the same arguments that you have when you, in political decision making. We did not do the right thing when we chose our deputy president. It is time. It was time. And we didn't use that opportunity. And we can celebrate having 50% women in cabinet. We still haven't reached 50% women in parliament overall. And as the ANC support drops, that is going to go down because quotas are not done consistently across all parties. So it's a very similar thing. We as women must not become part of that discourse where we are asked to justify our existence and our positions.
Right,
why do you employ me otherwise?
So how did we get to this, that an employer can and has and continues to say, Kubi is a woman, I'll give her 75% of what I'm going to give Peter. How did we get into this, and why does it continue?
I think there are a few things we need to be doing, and no employer of mine had better try it, but just so we're clear, I mean, there's the SABC, for example. They don't have to tell me Peter's salary, but they can certainly tell me average earnings at a certain level for men and women. As a public broadcaster, as a public institution, that should not be hidden. I have a right to know. As a citizen, I can ask and I should be told. I think the key thing here, a lot of these media institutions are very large and do report to the Department of Labour. I think the Employment Equity Act needs to be amended to say, if you do pick up such inequities within the reports you read, then we need to start corrective action. Why is it okay for us to do that when it comes to race, when it comes to all manner of other things, but not when it comes to gender?
Shweshwe, have you experienced it yourself, where you found out that a man at the same level as you was getting paid more than you?
I should say that I've never found that out.
Yeah.
And largely because I probably would never know, because Peter never told me that he earned more. But there are pay scales that are there in the market that are used by employers, and sometimes they use to justify pay that this, you deserve this is what we should pay you, and not necessarily to level out the pay scales among women and men. And I think the assumption has always just been that you're going to pay us fairly, you're going to pay me fairly, whether I'm a woman and I'm young, because I'm doing this work, which is equal to that of my male counterpart. It should be obvious that you should be doing that. It's very unfair to think that, and as this PwC report says, that someone just decides that, and I'd really like to think from an HR point of view and hear what their thoughts are. How did you decide that I as a woman will get less and the man will get more? I'd want to know what the justification for that is. And however, I think since we're having these conversations and we come into the front and saying this is unfair, you need to deal with it. I don't know if we at a point where we need to legislate it from the labor's point of view and saying that let's put it in the employment equity. But I think it's something that we should definitely be doing.
It does start to get a bit murky though. So when journalists arrive and they've all just come from their technical college or their university, they're all on square one, so pay them the same. However, what we do know for sure is that people have different abilities. And over time, some become great journalists and others not so great. And some attract readers much more than some others. How do we address this? Because it's in there that it can start to become a bit murky when they say, no, we're actually paying Peter because he's better.
But surely it's not gender that would
determine that. I mean, so what are you saying, Peter, that men are intrinsically better journalists than women?
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that this is where it starts to become, people start to pay differently. And so, how can I say this? So let's say you've got 3, 4, 5 people. Over time, some are men, some are women. The disparity in pay can be attributed to differences in ability, but you can't say you're level 7, you're level 6, you're level 3, and then they use that as an excuse to pay differently.
I think the bigger issue, and what that report is pointing to, is that people at the same level are getting different salaries. And I tell you, the biggest justification has always been that women women have children. Women will need maternity leave. I put to you, and this is something that has confounded me my entire life, if women didn't have children, who would? So we're being penalized for something that only we are able to do.
Is that articulated, or do you think that is actually what the underlying reason is?
I think it's a huge part of what drives, it's that thinking. That women, you can't rely on a woman to be, a reliable worker because women have these responsibilities. But then what about responsible parenthood and workplaces becoming more enabling? I mean, we can work anywhere. And I tell you, when you have more to do, you're much more organized.
Okay, so...
But for me, Peter, I want to add is that what's important is that once we get to a position where women are in these influential decision-making positions, then we wouldn't have to justify that I can do more than just be a woman and be a mother, because the person sitting on the table across me will also just have innate understanding of it. While perhaps for a man, it's not, it's something that they have to think about it. They have to imagine it. It's not intrinsic.
You're a boss now. And I'm just wondering, are women bosses doing enough to level the playing field? Or you kind of get in there and say, I've inherited this pay structure. How do you fix it? Because to fix it would mean somebody gets 25% pay increase and the other one gets 0 in a year for them to be on the same level.
Oh, I've just started on the position, but I think to address the issues that are at hand, we might have to consider such measures in the decision-making positions, to say that you have a conversation, and I suppose what's important is the issue of transparency, where we're saying, yes, you all on the one scale, but the other one is right at the end of the scale, and the women are at the beginning of the scale.
Somebody's got more experience.
Yeah, so what you need is to try and level the scales, and that people on the same level should be closer to each other. So you need to start moving the women who are on the same scale, you need to move them towards the end of where the pay is, and close the pay gap. Yes, it might mean that in a year others might get a higher increase than others.
But that's to correct, almost like
it will be to correct the
with
situation. Yes,
absolutely.
All right.
But also it is not the responsibility of only women bosses. We cannot, these are we keep having these conversations. We can't talk to ourselves. The point is, yes, you've assumed this position, you need to review what's happening and make corrective action. But it's incumbent on all bosses, all owners. Peter, how many years did you work with Vibhashni? I mean, was there any justification for Vibhashni earning less than you did?
Or earning more than me?
Or more than you. That's the other scenario. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with
she was an accomplished journalist. She was amazing. So my point, I refuse to go back to that place where I have to justify why I'm worth it. And that's part of a bigger discourse.
And it seems that women have to prove more than men. All right. We've got so much to get through, and we will revisit this in another way soon after the break. But stay with us. Don't forget, hashtag SABC Media Monitor. We want to hear what you think about these issues. Please start tweeting. Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, the media plays a significant role in the lives of almost everyone, men and women alike. However, Southern African women's rights organisation Gender Links in the past month released a report which shows that there is no gender equality in the media profession. It further states that South African television, women are still not being seen and heard as much as their male counterparts. This misrepresentation shows that there's an urgent need to achieve greater diversity and balance in the media. Okay, and I suppose it kind of extends to what we were talking about a little bit earlier on, but let's start with this issue of representation. You've worked in a lot of newsrooms, you've worked in media organizations. Do you see the same amount of women rising through the ranks and getting to senior positions as men, or is it still, sadly, a lot of men that have got the corner office?
It's not so often that you see women rise up. I think in the newsrooms that I've been in, there's a lot of women, and we all on the same level. We understand each other. And then some men start to rise up. They become senior journalists, senior reporters. And you're thinking, I'm still here. You're just shifting sideways. So there's definitely a need to address that problem also right from a general newsroom in moving journalists up the ranks. And I think often the challenge is the newsroom is just so, it's like everyone just go and you run off and you do your work, and maybe to use what you said earlier on, that people then start performing differently. And then you start saying, well, this one's a lot senior now, I can assign them more responsibilities. And I think obviously there are other issues which we need to consider again for women journalists, is that sometimes while it will be so much easier for a man, for example, to go and cover a story in GP's town in the middle of the night, for a woman journalist, there's so many considerations that we need to make, because we have to think, is it going to be safe for me? Could I possibly be attacked here? Because we know that crime affects a lot of women. So there's still quite a number of issues in our society as a whole that do become a stumbling block for us as women, for us to be able to run an extra mile, if you wanted to say, if we were to use what you say.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't then be penalized for that, because there's so many other stories that we can do.
Yeah.
And there's so much that we bring to the table as women and as reporters, as journalists.
That's a different perspective as well, isn't it? You can't... Anyway, but so the executive suite, there's not a lot of women in there. Why is that?
I think there's two very important things that we need to address. The one is, how do the media perceive their role? And often the media is very happy to report on injustice, on the lack of fairness, but will not look at themselves as being part of that society. And that's a very important thing. Do you see yourself as a part of transformation, or do you just report from a distance? And that's a very important ideological shift that needs to occur. I think the other very important thing that we don't even talk about is the high levels of sexual harassment and within media institutions. I mean, I remember when Vanessa Govender released her book a few months last year, I think it was, and the backlash, because it was while she was at the SABC.
Yeah.
And what shocked me was the SABC did not comment once on the fact, you know, whether or not, whatever the view might have been, it had occurred in the institution. It is the public broadcaster who should be preserving democracy for us, and the SABC did not make a single comment. And, you know, whether to support Vanessa or not was not the point, but about sexual harassment and what they're doing about it.
Yeah.
But it is prevalent.
In its defense, the SABC did set up an inquiry, didn't it, eventually, to probe sexual harassment and what's been going on in that field. So I suppose it had been allowed to go on for a while and fester, but it does seem that perhaps a page has been turned in that regard.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It's great.
All right, so there's so much to talk about. I don't know where to go next. Let's talk about how women are represented on television or portrayed. Your thoughts when you switch on your TV, what comes to mind?
You know, one of the things that, and I must just comment, the SABC's got a show on, it's not an SABC, there's a production on TV right now called The Republic. It's about, it has a woman president, and I think we must definitely applaud that. You know, it's one of the few times we've seen a black woman leading a country portrayed on television. What we often see on our screens is that subdued wife, or if they're not subdued, it's the crazy woman who's just, you know, with the, you know, like it's our portrayal of women on TV is still very problematic. But it goes back to what you were saying, that we as a media, do we see ourselves as advocates of change? Do we see ourselves as agents of this, ensuring this transformation in the media? And until we get to that point where even a soapy producer thinks, oh, I'm also someone who can actually change the tide or change the face of how women are portrayed in the media across board, I think we still have a very long way to go. But I'm happy to say there's change, but it's just too insignificant compared to the kind of problems we're seeing portrayed in our media.
I have started to see a lot more changes. I mean, you know, there were not so long ago you'd hardly ever see a homosexual character on television at all.
Largely, absolutely.
I don't know that I've seen any lesbian characters yet. There might be a few, but slowly but surely pages are turning, and you talked about that. What about when we do news stories? Because this came up again in the elections, that women's voices are not being heard as much as men's.
Well, I don't think it's a question of women's voices not being heard. Well, first, here's the problem. On the front page.
Yeah.
I mean, look at that picture. Do we have to have it focused on the woman's vagina with the leg lifted up so high? I mean, why? What is the necessity to do that, you know? On the subject of election reporting, and just a question, I heard someone laughing. Does someone actually really buy the newspaper for that picture? I think not. If sex really sold, newspapers would not be in trouble.
But hang on, you know, and we may say this, and I don't know what the psychology is, but I see a lot of car magazines, a lot of motorbike magazines. There's a girl on the motorbike, and I don't know what that's about, you know. But even women's magazines, in all fairness, it's these sort of size ones, the front covers.
Yeah.
These are not real people. So I just wonder, are we all not contributing to these
Completely,
stories?
absolutely, we're all contributing. But I ask again,
Yeah,
this is a newspaper,
yeah,
right? I want news.
yes,
And across the world,
yes.
newspapers are facing dwindling circulations. Those who have sat down, and the New York Times said, what is this about, and changed the way it reports and how it reports. 97% of the people who get the New York Times online also buy it.
Yeah,
So this formula is not working.
right.
We need to think about what that means and how we change that. Now, on to the subject of election reporting.
Yeah,
We have a cabinet with 50% women. We have, depending on the day and who's resigning, between 45 and 46% women in parliament. For 3 months during the election period, the total number of women sources was 20. Now, it's not. No journalist can tell me that there aren't women. Even the EFF had 50% women on its list. So nobody can say there weren't women who could comment. So what is that about, Peter? I'd like to ask journalists, what is that about?
You know, I was a full-time journalist during that election period. And you are right that at the face of it, it does look like we have a 50% representation. But the challenge is when you then go and ask for comment on a story, the person who's always made available does not depend on you as a journalist. It's the decision of that political party. So then you end up having to interview this man because that's the man that's available to comment on the issue.
But I suppose when you then go ask people on the street, why get a male voice if you know that the political voice is male? I suppose that's where we need to now start to say, because I got a male voice for this part of the story, I need to consciously think about getting a female voice.
I think, just to be fair also, I saw a lot of women voices. When you spoke about the people on the ground, the comments were women. When you spoke about the struggles of the women at home, I did see a representation of women. But with the powerful, it's more the voices of authority on a story that were problematic.
Media Monitoring Africa conducted very serious monitoring throughout the period. It was 20% women and only 7% of citizens were accessed during that time. And it's shocking because an election is about people, it's about citizens of a country. So I think, we need to be very objective about how we look at these things and say, and the SABC was among those, who were very low in terms of female representation. So it's something to, we have 55% women voters in this country.
But the report said that the SABC wasn't that bad, actually. I think.
No, you were okay. Yeah, you weren't too bad. Your stories and the type of coverage, but the sources were still quite low.
Right. And I think what you raised in then that was what was important is that what we still have is that we don't have voices of people, even in an election period where we are talking about issues that affect people. We still go to the official voices instead of going to the people, and that is what we need to address also. So there are some real problems that we have, even us as journalists and us as the media, that we need to be conscious of. And I think it's conversations like these that need to be had. It's more reports that need to be addressed, but also holding the journalists accountable in, are you responsible in your reporting? What do you stand for? What's the objective in this report that you have? And I think one of the stories we can bring to fore at this point is how the media reported the Johannesburg riots.
We will talk about that because that is something that's very close to my heart as well. So it does sound like there's a lot of work to do, and as you say, it's everybody, not just women, but men also have to lead from the front as well to make sure that we represent things fairly. Okay, we're going to take another break, and then when we come back, we'll start reviewing the media. Hopefully, we're going to go to Kenya and see what's happening in the media there. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's fly now to Nairobi in Kenya and speak to our international editor this morning. And joining us via Skype is Nanjala Nyabola, who's a writer and political analyst. Jambo, habari yako?
Mzuri sana, habari yako?
Poa. Thanks so much, Asante, for joining us. So it's Sunday. East Africa is always abuzz with news. What are the top stories and the top issues that are playing out there today?
Right now in Kenya especially, we are dealing with the aftermath of a series of high-profile deaths. We lost a very high-profile member of parliament, Ken Okoth, to colorectal cancer. And literally a few days later, we lost the governor of Bomet, Joyce Laboso, also to cancer. And then there's been a really surging interest or concern really in the public sphere about whether the country is equipped to handle the rising cases of cancer, especially now that we have so many high-profile people succumbing to the disease. In a few years ago, the government, the current administration, promised that they would invest in treatment centers because at the moment, if you have advanced cancer in Kenya, you have to go overseas to seek treatment. So a lot of people were going to India, to the U.S. These two members of parliament and governor went to India and also to the UK and to France to seek treatment. So there is a crisis. There's a public health crisis in that the country is facing surging illnesses, but doesn't have the capacity to treat them, doesn't have the public health capacity to treat them. So this is the conversation that's dominating the public space in Kenya this week. If you peek over the newspapers this morning, you will see the sort of scandals that kind of come out from those funerals, the two funerals dominating the front pages. A lot of it is to do with the politics of being a high-profile person in Kenya. We have a lot of traditions that kind of collide with modern ways of thinking about death and interment. And when it's a high-profile person, the crisis kind of plays out in the public sphere. So one of the people in question opted for a cremation, which some people in his community have called an abomination. Yeah. That's not how we do things. And it's raised a lot of questions about modernity and how much agency really the ill person has to decide how they transition from this life. In the end, it's a debate that a lot of people are really engaging with. But the interesting thing that comes out also from that front page in the Daily Nation is that picture, which seems innocuous, but it is the president and the deputy president and the leader of the opposition, Raila Odinga, all attending Governor Joyce Laboso's funeral in Bomet. And Joyce Laboso was a member of both parties. She actually ended up shifting between the two major political parties. But given the fraught tensions between Uhuru Kenyatta, the president, William Ruto, his deputy president, and Raila Odinga, the leader of the opposition, to see them in this show of unity at a funeral really has raised a lot of questions about the stability of the current political situation. What are they playing at? What's the end game here? Funerals in Kenya tend to be much more important, even than weddings. Really, they are a place where people make political statements and they make speeches that signal how the political landscape is going to change. So that picture actually has a lot of significant political landscape.
All right, I'm going to change tack a little bit. So that's what's happening in the media and what's playing out. So we're having a whole discussion here in the moment in the studio about how women are represented, how they're portrayed, how they're reported upon. And I just wonder what the experience is for you in Kenya.
Oh, I mean, you don't even have to go far. If you look even at the front pages in the paper, you kind of see the crisis that we're dealing with representations of women in the press. This conversation around Ken Okoth, who's the MP for Kibra, and his burial has really brought out the misogyny and the gendered lens through which information is processed. So Joyce Laboso, who is buried in Bomet, is one of three governors. We only had 3 female governors in Kenya. And at her funeral, a member of the family says, well, now her husband should marry one of her younger sisters. And it's triggered this entire conversation about, well, is her younger sister a piece of property that she can just be handed over to a man just, to make some kind of familial political statement? You see how they talk about Ken Okoth's wife as some kind of, bitter, vengeful, angry person simply for trying to implement his final wishes. His will was very clear that he wanted to be cremated, and she tries to stick to the authenticity of that voice, and she gets accused of being vindictive and women trying to steal a man from his family. the misogyny, the patriarchy that influences how Kenyan women are represented in the press, it exists at multiple levels. It's how they talk about women. It's how women are framed. It's who gets to tell the story. If you scroll through the papers this morning, when does the first byline by a woman appear? Page 9 and 10, the very first few pages are all dominated by stories written about men, by men, and it really shapes how we think about women as political agents and as people really with agency over their own lives or their political destiny.
All right, so it looks like it's a common struggle and pretty much across the continent. And sadly, one of the key words that joins all of this together perhaps is patriarchy. All right, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. But thank you so much indeed. Asante sana and kwaheri.
Kwaheri, asante sana.
All right, that's our international editor for today, Nanjala, who is speaking to us from Nairobi in Kenya. Now, in other news, the SABC will be releasing a report into editorial interference at the public broadcaster. Yeah, the media has been invited to release this on Monday morning. Veteran journalist Joe Tlolwe chaired the commission and will be presenting that report. And that's all happening tomorrow. The public protector this week got some support from various quarters for what they see as an attack on her by the media. The ANC Women's League issued a statement saying that they condemned the Stratcom-type agenda against Busisiwe Mkhwebane, labelling it barbaric personal attacks. Well, I can tell you that the EFF also laid into a story that was run by the Financial Mail. And this story, they said, outrightly called it racist and sexist. All right, now for our feature this week, and this is where we go back in time. We're commemorating Women's Day on Friday. Let's take a look at the time when the motion to commemorate the 9th of August was officially adopted and passed in Parliament.
Women's Day was celebrated in Parliament today by the adoption of a Women's Charter and a motion to declare August 9th National Women's Day. The motion was approved unanimously by the Assembly, and the Charter calls for equality for women in every sphere of life. Fred Mukhamisi reports.
The document, to be known as the Women's Charter for Effective Equality, was presented to the three presiding officers of Parliament, Speaker Dr. Fine Gwingwala, the President of the Senate, Mr. Kubi Kutsia, and the Chairman of the Constitutional Assembly, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. The document was also presented to premiers of the 8 provinces at their respective headquarters. The Charter states that equality should be applied to every aspect of women's lives, including the family, workplace, and as citizens. SABC Chairperson Dr. Ivy Matsepe Kasiburi highlighted some important features of the Charter before the presentation.
The preamble of the Charter boldly states women's claim for full and equal participation in the creation of a non-sexist, non-racist, democratic society.
Responding on behalf of the 3 presiding officers, Mr. Ramaphosa congratulated the women for having produced such a document. He also commended them for waging the struggle for human rights and liberation.
The next frontier that we need to confront and to conquer is the frontier of the emancipation of women in South Africa.
Today also marked the historic march by thousands of women to the union buildings in Pretoria, protesting against the issuing and carrying of passbooks. Some of the major figures to coordinate the resistance movement were Lillian Ngoyi, Annie Silinga, and Helen Joseph. Ruth Mumpati, presently in Parliament, also took part in that march 38 years ago. Later on in the day, a motion to recognize August the 9th as National Women's Day was tabled in Parliament. Speakers, mainly women from all major political parties, supported the motion and was passed unopposed by Parliament.
All right, so that was a look back in time at how August 9 was made into that special day in Parliament. Okay, time now for us to take a look at what's been happening in the newspapers, not just today, but during the course of the week. And I've got to tell you that one story that's kind of getting the headlines, and we saw it just now, where the EFF have climbed in and the ANC Women's League have climbed in, and they're saying that Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane is under attack. Well, let me just play what the advocate herself said about this media onslaught yesterday.
How can you report every day, 3 times or 4 times a day, because this institution is investigating certain individuals? And I didn't go around fish for those applications, though. In fact, those complaints, they were lodged with the office. We are investigating. That's doing our work without fear or favor, irrespective of the threats and the punitive costs or the threats to punitive costs. So we will still go ahead and do our work.
All right, I want to give her the benefit of the doubt, because there's certainly, when you read the papers, the traffic is one direction and it's going towards her and painting her in a certain way. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's that the EFF is right and that ANC Women's right, that she's under attack?
No.
Okay.
You know, when we speak about fairness and treating stories fairly, whether she's a man or a woman, let's be honest, she's made some fairly, how to put it, inappropriate, she's done a few things that don't make sense to many of us, so she needs to be held to account. But the question is, are we going to hold others to account in a similar way?
Right, right.
So I think what's happening is right. The media has to keep her on point, has to keep her accountable, but they have to do the same to others.
Trisha, do you think, though, that what she is saying in her defense is getting a fair outing? Because there's always 2 sides to a story.
There certainly always is. And I think we definitely do need to bring out some of the comments that she makes. And I've seen that she uses a lot of social media to share her statements, and this could be largely because she feels that she doesn't have a voice in the media in South Africa, perhaps. However, I wouldn't say that the attack on her is unfair. And I think we need to also separate the public protector and Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane as a person. I think we definitely want to maintain the integrity of that office. And she needs to also be held accountable as the senior accounting officer within that office of the public protector. And I think where we are now, there's a lot of conversations around her and her conduct, and that might compromise the integrity of that office. And I think South Africa as a country, generally, we worked so hard to ensure that Chapter 9 institution is held in the highest regard that it is.
All right, let's take a look at the front of the Financial Mail, because this is the one that's really caused a lot of the problems. I hope we can bring that up. So look at the headline, "Enemy of the State?" ? Is that fair?
Well, it's an editorial. I think, let's also be honest, the media publications are also
made errors. Is that the same as being an enemy of the state?
She has made errors, and we wouldn't go to as far as calling her an enemy of the state. But you can see this is an editorial. It ends with a question mark, and it wants you to get to start thinking. But this is exactly what I was saying, that
Kubi?
Look, I think this is very difficult, because I think what you said is actually also at the heart of the problem. She is compromising the integrity of that office by going on social media and saying things that she should not be saying on social media. I mean, really, there's a level of integrity and dignity and honesty, and there are ways to do these things if you sit in the position she is. You know, the Financial Mail, one would have to read the story, think about it. I think it is maybe a little bit of overkill, but had Jacob Zuma's picture been there, what would we have said?
All right. Okay. The other story that I'm also worried about this past week is when it first got reported, and this was the riots in downtown Johannesburg CBD, and it came out and it was foreign nationals versus the police. As soon as I heard that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to spark something. And I just wonder, is as shocking as these images are, the use of the word foreign nationals. Let me start with you. Was that responsible?
Not at all. How do you even know that? I mean, you know, journalism is meant to be fair. It's meant to be EU balanced. It has to be based on fact. Who knows who those people are? You know, there's obviously much more to the story than we're even seeing from those images. I mean, no kind of violence is justified. But one has to delve and find out what is going on there. And it's a crime. So whoever is responsible, South Africans, foreign nationals, whomever, needs to then be arrested. And, you know,
that's the question I was asking, actually, because even if they are foreign nationals, the story is about criminality, not the nationality. I mean, imagine if we said Zulus were running amok downtown.
Yeah, this was definitely very irresponsible from the side of journalists and reporters, and I do hope that at some point the media will come out and say that we could have reported the story differently. I think one of the issue here, and what we need to appreciate, is that when you are in South Africa, you have equal rights. So our law does not discriminate on whether you are a foreign national or you're a South African. So I felt like there was a lot of, maybe we were looking for clickbaits from a media's point of view, but it was absolutely irresponsible. And this happened in the week where the Statistician General released our employment statistics. The conversation that we should have had here was the issue of the informal economy and the role it plays in the South African context, where we have such high numbers of unemployment.
You know, it's shocking. I was in the car and I heard a radio presenter say, I can't believe what happened in Johannesburg CBD. Foreign nationals must say sorry and say, not in my name. I was gobsmacked.
Utterly crazy. You know, the scary part of this, and I think I've been saying this, I've been interviewed a few times around the election. And I've been saying that I think as we move towards the local government election, we're going to see a high level of frustration. And unfortunately, I think it's also going to manifest in this kind of way, because people are frustrated. You know, 25 years into democracy, and your life has not changed. You still don't have running water and sanitation. You know, you're at risk because you've got to go outside your home late at night to go use the facilities. So I think this kind of picture, unfortunately, if things are not done to stem this, and I think our president is very strong on the macroeconomic, but not as strong on the micro. And that's where most of the poor and disenfranchised unemployed are.
All right, so a little bit earlier on, I asked you to share your thoughts with us on social media, hashtag SABC Media Monitor. And this is what you've had to say on some of our discussions today. Let's take a look on what you've been saying. So the first one from Nazim, always a favorite of ours, saying that I think that it's high time that women get paid as men too, because you'll find out that they are doing the same work and even doing it better than men sometimes. That I can attest to for sure. And Samora says, SA Media Monitor, payment is more like looking down upon the person affected. I've always known that it happens in sports. I was hoping you would talk about this in relation to race, Peter. Whites are still paid better regardless of qualifications in South Africa. So many issues to look at, and yeah, it is Women's Month. I think the issue really is for us to be more conscious, and this isn't just a fight for women, it's a fight for men as well. So let's all get together and start to make things better for society as a whole. Once again, thanks very much to my guests. Thank you. You guys were brilliant guest editors, and pleasure having you, and look forward to having you again in the studio soon.
Thank you.
To you at home, thank you so much indeed for tuning in. You've been watching Media Monitor. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the same. Have a blessed day, everyone. Bye-bye.